Yeah, so we're doing a little bit of a follow-up from our last video. We talked mostly about the lawsuit and the update there, how we're looking pretty positive. We had two positive updates on the lawsuit front. It is really looking like it. I mean, if I were a betting man, I would say XRP is probably going to win it. The CEO and the folks that are actually running the trial over on the SEC kind of expect it to end within the first 6 months of next year. So that's when a lot of the investors are looking towards actually having that be wrapped up. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about today is what happens after. Let's say we assume that XRP Ripple wins the lawsuit. What is kind of the case for how they're going to be successful, right? And that's kind of what we want to run through a little bit today. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is this interesting take. This was actually from a little, probably 6 months to a year ago from JP Morgan. And they talked about how basically XRP adoption could go through the roof if they beat this SEC case. And they essentially see it replacing SWIFT transfers because basically right now, SWIFT takes up to 5 days and it's pretty expensive. And XRP takes 3 to 5 seconds and it's a fraction of a cent to actually complete that. So whether someone's sending $1 billion or $2 billion or $10, it's a fraction of a cent. And so a lot of times in these situations where banks are transferring, let's say intercontinentally or between countries, they're going to cut out all these intermediary banks, cut out all these different fees. So it makes Ripple and XRP a really, really valuable asset to large financial institutions and also countries. And the other aspect to this is that a lot of people kind of view XRP in combat with stablecoins, but it's really almost complementary, right? So XRP can kind of serve as a bridge asset in an international settlement of funds. So it's not going to compete with stablecoins. It's actually going to be complementary to stablecoins. So if we see countries coming out with their own stablecoins or coming out with their own central bank digital currencies, it's going to be complementary to that as opposed to being in conflict with it. And one of the other things, too, that we highlighted in the last video about XRP was that a lot of people are underestimating how much they've gotten their grips across the whole world. So they actually basically now have over 100 financial institutions that are currently partnered with them, including PNC Bank, Bank of America, Santander, who's the biggest bank in England and a lot of Europe. And so, you have all these banks from all of these different countries that are on board already using Ripple, like they're already actively using it. And I think one of the biggest things in crypto that, we kind of not bypass, but we sort of forget is that we get so excited about the use cases, the potential, what can this solve? But Ripple is already solving a lot of these problems for some of the institutions who hold the most money in the world. So they're already solving some of the biggest problems for some of the biggest fund holders in the entire world. And I think that's where, a lot of people kind of tend to, XRP has been clouded by this whole SEC thing, but people don't really realize how much it's been able to get its grips into, countries all over the world. And so right now, basically a lot of these institutions that are using Ripple are seeing it mainly from a couple different angles, but a lot of these benefits are, like we talked about, low transaction costs, super scalable. So it does 1,500 transactions per second, not necessarily a Solana or anything like that, but it can compete with Visa. So that's a big thing, right? Because Swift uses Visa and other, well, I don't know if they necessarily use Visa, but Swift is like its own payment system. It's pretty comparable to Visa in terms of TPS. So it's going to be able to compete there. It's going to be scalable. It has a high uptime. So there's no the payment processing system is down. It's a blockchain. It's a ledger. So it's going to be really, really easy for the 150 validators on RippleNet to keep it up and keep it running all the time, 24/7. And the other thing, too, which we just keep hitting on and, can't stress how important it is, but going into the future, low power consumption and low energy consumption products in financial system are going to be increasingly valuable. So talking about how XRP is now going to be, basically lowering the power consumption in comparison to a lot of these other payment processing systems. So these banks are kind of eyeing it, and these institutions are eyeing it, and countries are eyeing it as a good option, to kind of onboard what they're going to do after this. And so a big use case for a lot of these countries are, cross-border payments, CBDCs, having a stable and secure infrastructure on the back end to support all that. And so really XRP has essentially taken the last 10 years and built this infrastructure that almost no one else is going to be able to compete with. So going back to the JP Morgan article, there's really no competition for them if they beat the SEC lawsuit, and they're basically ready to take advantage of all of the relationships they've already built once they break free of that. So the future of XRP is looking pretty bright. And coming from one last thing before, I know I've been kind of just talking at you guys, but one last thing before you guys hop in. Over 100 countries right now actively, so 100 central banks have already begun researching CBDCs or have already started issuing CBDCs. So like it's coming, whether we like it or not. Obviously, there's arguments on both sides of whether it's going to be good or not, but Ripple is going to be there to kind of secure that infrastructure and be able to have these countries build on top of what they've already built to easily create these CBDCs for the countries. So XRP is set up in a really, really good way. I mean, I think a lot of times it gets some bad flack as like a shit coin or like a scam coin, but like I think it seems like most of it, after doing my research, is really around the SEC lawsuit. And if they beat that, it's a serious company and a serious technology to be dealt with.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I feel like a lot of organizations, right, especially smaller, right, they would get hit with something like this and it would take a couple of years and it'd be a lot of lawyer fees, it'd be a lot going on. It's really cool to see that XRP has still kind of held true to like who they are and trying to push forward their vision and their mission and everything that they're trying to do and with all these partnerships and everything like that. They really haven't slowed up. This hasn't slowed them up. They've kind of been of the opinion the whole time that they're going to, make it through this and kind of have that big win for the crypto space in general. So really cool to kind of see all of that come to fruition. I feel like it's all coming to a head right now. Do they have, just out of curiosity, do they have a timeline of when the lawsuit will be wrapped up? Is it like the next couple months?
Yeah, so they're saying the first half of next year is when it's supposed to be wrapped up. And actually, the SEC the court told the SEC and Ripple to come to an agreement within the next 8 months for it to be solved. So it's got to be there has to be a resolution in that time frame. But I think it's going to be really, really interesting if it does get solved because there really isn't that much competition. And like I was saying before, it's almost like the way that they do this and the way that their technology operates, it's almost like onboarding like a new SaaS vendor. Like it's so easy. Like it's a 6-step process to basically give every person in your country or allow a central bank to distribute and mint and operate a CBDC. So they just onboard, via APIs. They can mint the CBDC, then they distribute it. They can transact it. All the transactions settle in 2 to 3 seconds. So even quicker than if you're going to put your credit card into a gas machine, like into a gas station machine. And you can also operate these CBDCs like a cryptocurrency, right? So you can burn them, you can redeem them for other fiat currencies internationally. So there's just a lot of flexibility, and basically no one's built this infrastructure. Ripple is almost an 100-person or almost like a 700, 800-person company. They have a lot of cash in the bank. So from just a fundamental standpoint, they're showing a lot of strength for sure.
Yeah. And they just save so much time in that process. I feel like we can't highlight it enough that Swift transaction Swift just being a messaging service, there's even other layers to transferring money across borders. That's going to take 5 days, 7 days. Ripple, like you said, couple seconds and this thing is done. And so it's really impressive. It would be a huge win for the space. And you're right. There's not a lot of competitors in the space. The few ones that are here or are competing with Ripple, they're years behind. So, no, pretty impressive stuff. I think it definitely deserved another look this episode.
It's funny. It makes that, I know we talked about the Swift Link partnership last week. it makes that even more obvious. I feel like at this point where it's like Swift is like, oh shit,
Yeah.
XRP might be coming for us, So that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot there. I mean, even diving into the next topic that we'll get into, like, this is a really important use case, like the messaging and just cross-border payments. It's a huge thing that I feel like crypto and just the blockchain technology, like, it tackles super well. We talk about, hey, there's no use cases in crypto. Well, here's a great one. And there's traditional finance, groups and banks that are rushing to try and get into the space, realizing that Ripple has had this huge head start, and we've got court cases trying to slow them up, but it seems like they're providing a lot of utility to this use case. So
completely agree with that. I was wondering, Sia, could you pull up that list of those banks and companies that they have partnerships with again, if you have it handy?
Yeah, and so there's about 100 financial institutions. I think this maybe shows about 30 of them. So Bank of America and PNC are probably the two other big ones that are left off of this. But these are kind of some of the bigger banks and bigger financial institutions. So not necessarily all banks, but that they're partnered with.
No, I think one thing that stands out to me is the number of those institutions that happen to be in emerging markets. And going hand in hand with exactly what Evan was saying, it's like, I think a lot of times when people say like, oh, like, what's the use case of crypto? It comes from a place of probably living in like an area and growing up in an area that like financial infrastructure was like an afterthought, like basically like given, right? Like it was a complete given, right? For us growing up, like, oh, I can, have a bank account very easily, and I can send money to my friends on Venmo very easily, and I can like do this and that, right? Like that infrastructure was something that we all just grew up with, right? But when you go to a lot of these emerging markets, like that concept is like completely foreign. Like forget about like, sending money on Venmo. Like some people like barely even have a bank account, if anything, right? And so this ability for crypto to give financial access and the ability to pay cross-border, exactly what Evan was saying, is massively, that opportunity is massively underappreciated by a lot of people, I think. So that was just one thing that when I was reading this list stood out to me, is how many of those happen to be in emerging markets. Makes perfect sense.